to Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this is another episode of my Innocence Lost wrongful conviction series. So, today we're going to be talking about Robert Roberson. And as you can see from my title, currently, he is incarcerated. His conviction has not been overturned yet. Um, Currently, he's facing DP based on junk science. He got D row. So I apologize for not being able to say certain words on YouTube, but that's their rules, not mine. So I will use different words that aren't as offensive. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about Robert Roberson. It's a it's a name that you'll remember, Robert Roberson. So this is from the Marshall Project. I'm going to be reading you a little bit about not just Robert Roberson's case, but also junk science and how this particular junk science is affecting our bleh, judicial system. I can never say that word. It's a hard one for me. And so it's prejudicial. I have to like slow it down and say it. Otherwise it just comes out all slurred. All right, anyways, that's just me. All right, so he is facing execution for his daughter's loss of life. Now, science suggests that it was an accident. So Robert Roberson is asking the US Supreme Court to examine shaken baby syndrome and the state of forensic science. So you can see Robert Roberson is in court here in this photograph with his attorneys. And this was back in 2018. He was convicted in 20 for a 2002 homicide, or well, uh, it was likely not a homicide. It was just that she lost her life due to um, medical issues. So his daughter lost her life at 2 years old, unfortunately, and he was convicted for her crime or for her death. I guess I just have to say it. Sometimes you just gotta say it, YouTube. All right, so his attorneys asked for a new trial based on findings that they say debunk the flawed science presented in his original trial. Again, we're going to be talking about shaken baby syndrome and how it um hold on one second. Sorry, I thought I had the wrong tab here. I was going to read to you here. So this is an article from September 13th, 2023 regarding junk science, including the shaken baby syndrome. So for half a century, I'm going to be flipping back and forth. I'm just reading a little excerpt about this so you know what shaken baby syndrome is, because it is kind of not really talked about as much anymore. So let's talk about it. So, for half a century, doctors have blamed babies' unexplained, sometimes fatal injuries on shaken baby syndrome, with hospitals reporting about 1,300 cases a year and hundreds of parents and caregivers getting prosecuted annually. And I want to point out this reminds me very much so of the Take Care of Maya trial, the Maya trial, where she was a child and she had severe medical issues, and the hospital staff, including Sally Smith, the doctor there, she was like the number one thing that she blamed all these injuries and things on was the parents, and they would get their children taken away because she's just a doctor, but she was out there to get like she was out for blood. She wanted to take down families and say, no, that's CA. That's symptoms of CA or physical whatever. Like if they have a physical injury, then obviously you're hitting your kid. I don't know. All right, I was a kid that ran around all the time. I got hurt all the time. I hurt myself all the time. Like sometimes it was my siblings, my older sister, but sisters, both of them, I guess, have injured me in the past, but one in particular, more so than others. Anyways, so yeah, like if my mom had taken me, this actually did happen. So funny story. Well, it's not so funny, and actually, it's not funny, but we talk about it in my family like it's hilarious. My sister, the one who hurt me a lot, she pulled my arm out of the socket when I was about probably like 4 years old. I remember this vividly. I remember the pain. I remember going to the hospital and the doctors asking me questions about whether my mom did this to me, whether my mom or my dad hurt me. And I said, no, my sister did it as I'm like bawling and crying. I'm like, "Oh, my sister did it." They're trying to like move it around and put it in places that it didn't want to go and take x-rays. And then finally they just like snapped it back in and then it felt better. But man, that sucked. Anyways, 4 years old, arm pulled out of the socket because she didn't want me telling on her. That's funny, hilarious story that she loves to tell. All right, so for half a century, doctors have blamed babies' unexplained, sometimes fatal injuries on this shaken baby syndrome, and that's amazing that 1,300 cases per year are reported, and people are prosecuted on this, taken to prison. And this particular gentleman, Robert Roberson, is one of those individuals. But the science behind it has increasingly come under suspicion, especially when there's no obvious physical evidence of an assault. A New Jersey appellate court Wednesday, so this was in September of last year, added to the growing resistance, siding with a lower court judge who declared shaken baby syndrome was junk science, a ruling that barred prosecutors from bringing it up in the Middlesex County cases of two fathers who challenged the CA indictments. So there's more in this article about that. If you're interested, I would recommend it. It is Dana DiFilippo appeals court agrees shaken baby syndrome is junk science in some cases. Title of the article. All right, and lastly, I just wanted to read this one portion. Where'd it go? Here. Oh, I have it highlighted. So, while Shanken baby syndrome is generally accepted in pediatrics, it's controversial in the biomechanics community, which, if you were watching the Karen Reed trial, they brought in a biomechanical engineer from ARCO, who's like top scientist guys of the world. They brought in two guys. One was for reconstruction, accident reconstruction, and the other one was a biomechanic uh, expert. Both of them very skilled at reconstructing an accident, and said that no way was it physically possible. The science just doesn't work in the way that the Commonwealth's argument was and how it happened. And they said that Karen's car could not have hit him. So, biomechanics scientists disagree on whether shaking alone can create forces strong enough to cause the intracranial trauma needed to diagnose the syndrome, which is also known as this word that I can't say, head trauma, she added. So, just think about that. All of the parents that have gone to prison for losing their baby to shaken baby syndrome, which now we know isn't necessarily a thing. And those poor parents had to sit in prison after they just lost their child and didn't know why. And it had nothing to do with them. So it's sad. There's a lot of cases now that science is starting to catch up. The court system needs to catch up. And there's been a lot of people that have gone to prison because the science wasn't necessarily there at the time, or the knowledge of whatever it was wasn't there. And now we need to just do better. So where was I? Did I even start this? No. All right. So last fall, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear Robert Roberson's argument, that he was wrongly convicted with discredited scientific evidence. This week, Texas officials scheduled Roberson's execution for October 18th. So this was actually updated July 2nd, 2024 at 4:30 p.m. So this is current news. This week, they scheduled his execution for October 17th. Anderson County District Attorney Allison Mitchell, or Allison, I thought that was the last name. I'm like, Allison. Nope, that's the first name. Allison Mitchell requested the execution date, having argued that the science has not changed and Roberson is guilty of his daughter's loss of life. I did read this before, I swear. I just didn't remember Allison. Roberson's lawyers are now asking the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to examine his conviction again, pointing to a second DP case in Dallas where prosecutors conceded that a similar shaken baby syndrome diagnosis should not be the basis for execution. So the very state that he is imprisoned for the crime, or for what the state is alleging is a crime, they're also saying that that shouldn't be used against someone for execution. So isn't that interesting? Because that's exactly why he's on D-row. So long after after he retired from solving homicides in rural East Texas, Brian Wharton looked back on one of his biggest cases with unease. A father named Robert Roberson had shown up at an emergency room with his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki Curtis. She was unconscious and turning blue. The father speculated that she'd fallen out of bed, but a pediatrician concluded that she had been shaken, quote, very forcefully. As a detective with the Palestine Police Department, Wharton deduced the father was to blame and testified at the 2003 trial where Roberson was sentenced to D-row. But Wharton never could make sense of the man's demeanor throughout these events. He's not getting mad, he's not getting sad, he's just not right, Wharton recalled. 20 years later, a defense lawyer showed up at the detective's door, explaining that Roberson's effect could be explained by autism spectrum disorder, which we didn't know about 20 years ago. So there's that, which they'll explain it more. I'll just shut up. All right, so but that wasn't all. Many in the medical community had turned against the diagnosis at the heart of his conviction, shaken baby syndrome. Wharton quickly came to believe he'd helped send an innocent man to D-row. So the detective in the case, 20 years later, is approached by an investigator or a defense lawyer. They're detectives. They're defense lawyers have detectives, so they can go out and ask people these questions. And so this detective went to this other detective's door and said, "Hey, by the way, that prisoner that you put away and said that he was acting so weird, we think he's got autism. So the one that you said is just not right. Maybe that's why." Interesting. All right. So Wharton quickly came to believe that he'd helped an innocent man go to prison and get sentenced to D-row. So yeah, that's something you got to live with. That's something that would really take a while to come to terms with. He says, "I took a deep breath and said, okay, now we begin to make this right. Fortunately, he's still alive when science comes to his rescue." End quote. Roberson's lawyers are now seeking review from the U.S. Supreme Court, which will decide whether to hear his case in the coming weeks. Scientists, doctors, judges, and D. Roe exonerees have filed briefs framing the case as an opportunity to stop wrongful convictions based on what some call junk science. I'm uh, I'm going to throw out a book here and they talk about it later, but it was crazy to me because I'm like reading it. I'm like, oh my God, I have that book in my Audible right now in my library. It is called Junk Science and the American Criminal Justice System. And it's very good. It talks about different things that have been debunked in different cases. So it's interesting. All right. So their arguments point to attention in the U.S. So Roberson's attorneys argue that there's tension in the U.S. legal system, saying convictions are supposed to be final, but science changes. In recent years, prisoners and their lawyers have challenged a number of forensic disciplines, from hypnosis to roadside drug tests to testimony about BLOOD spatter, hair, photographs, burn patterns, bite marks, tire tracks, and speech patterns, all of which you can't say definitively that something came from something else necessarily, or hypnosis. Come on, guys. Also, what was I going to say? Handwriting analysis, that's been debunked. What else? Um, 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 I was going to say something else and now it escapes me. Maybe I'll come back to it. All right, so since the 1980s, nearly a quarter of overturned convictions have featured false or misleading forensic evidence. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, a collaboration of several universities that tracks such cases. Yeah, so there's a ton of things that have now been debunked as not necessarily accurate. Oh, tool markings on bullet casings. That was the other thing I was going to say with tool markings is that that's impossible to say definitively this tool came from, or this mark came from this gun, because you don't know that. You don't have all the guns in the world to test to see if any of them make similar patterns. How do you know? All right, so since the 1980s, nearly a quarter of overturned convictions have featured false or misleading forensic evidence. I said that already. All right, so we believed, this is this is a quote from Chris Fabricant, who is a lawyer for the New York-based Innocence Project, which works to overturn wrongful convictions across the country and is the author of the 2022 book Junk Science in the American Criminal Justice System. He says, or she, I'm not really sure. I think it's a man. We believed anyone in a lab coat with letters after their names. Um, but these methods were developed by law enforcement to solve possible crimes not in laboratories. That's a big deal. Often, a police officer could become qualified as an expert with a few days of training and portray their subjective analysis as impartial science on the witness stand, which we got to see firsthand in the Karen Reed trial. If you didn't watch it, at least go back and watch the cross examination of Trooper Joseph Paul, who was their accident reconstructionist. He is a trooper for the Massachusetts State Police. He has had a few days or so of training, and that's what makes him an expert in this field, and he doesn't hold any degrees in it. He I don't know, can't remember all of it, but yeah, he's not qualified, definitely not. And if you didn't watch it, go back and watch it because it's very entertaining to watch Alan Jackson tear apart his credibility. Um, but yeah, so he becomes an expert. He takes a couple courses that MSP sends him to, that probably MSP is in charge of putting on the training, I'm assuming. Like they probably do some of their own trainings. So it's like he's getting experience from other cops who might be doing it the wrong way. You know what I'm saying? They might not have the proper techniques and um, the proper training to provide to the expert witnesses. So Trooper Joe comes on and he gets sworn in as an expert and testifies, oh yeah, John O'Keefe got hit in the arm and he spun around and he flew 30 feet in the air, and all that happened was Karen Reed's taillight got shattered. No other damage. And the science doesn't explain it that way. And the experts for ARCO, who have the degrees and did the science and the math, they came in and said, whoa, 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 no, wait, that isn't even possible. So that's what you can get when you've got experts, law enforcement, training other law enforcement. They might not be doing it right. And then you bring them on the witness stand and they put someone away for life, or they get executed for it. There's no way to know how many convictions or even executions have been based on flawed or misinterpreted evidence, and there is little logic to who wins relief and who does not. So, who in the end, like, it gets an appeal and wins an appeal. Shortly before Roberson lost in the Texas courts, a woman named Jennifer Del Preet was released from prison in Illinois after making several or similar legal claims about the shaken baby syndrome in that state's courts. Since 2013, 7 states have passed laws explicitly directing courts to entertain claims from prisoners based on changing science. Texas was the first, and the state's top criminal court has overturned around a dozen convictions, but none were DP cases, and defense lawyers say it remains too hard to win relief in the state. But, um, e- Roberson's lawyer says, quote, you have a law, but no matter what you do, you can't satisfy the burden that the Texas court has created. The judicial system has totally failed him. The Supreme Court ruled in 1993 in Daubert. I know this is kind of like it gives you a lot of background on some of these cases and how we got here. So the Supreme Court ruled in 1993 in Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals Inc. that federal judges had to play a gatekeeping role and decide whether scientific testimony was, quote, reliable and, quote, relevant. This came at a time when corporations were claiming it was too easy for plaintiffs to enlist scientists to make claims about their products' harms. So corporations that were getting sued by individuals would easily come up and find some kind of scientist to claim, oh yeah, this product is harming them. This product's causing whatever medical issues this person's having. And you, how do you find the science to rebut it when it's junk science in the first place? So while some state courts adopted this approach, others focused on whether experts' methods were accepted by their fellow scientists. In the meantime, forensic techniques proliferated and popular culture portrayed them as exciting new tools for delivering justice. Detectives used bite marks to match serial killer Ted Bundy to one victim at his 1979 trial, helping to popularize such analysis despite its questionable accuracy. And that's something that's always left a bad taste in my mouth. If you guys have ever read um, Stranger Beside Me, Anne Rule. Anne Rule, Stranger Beside Me, she talks about her experiences with Ted Bundy, and she knew him his whole life, basically, since he was like a young adult up until his execution. And something that has always left me feeling uneasy about reading that book were the bite marks, talking about the bite marks in that case. Maybe I'll go in and do a deeper dive on it and look back on what Anne Rule says about it. But there's something that just made me like it's been debunked since. And they really relied heavily on these bite marks, saying that it had to be Ted's and whatever, whatever. So I just remember that that was um, a big part of the book that left me feeling like his trial wasn't fair. Like he didn't get a fair trial, in my opinion. All right. Not that he didn't deserve or didn't, deserve where he ended up, but I'm just saying I don't think his trial was necessarily on the up and up. And a lot of times that's the case. Like in the Karen Reed trial, I think there was a lot of evidence that shouldn't have come in also. So it just happens. And I'm sure for the Commonwealth, they thought there was a lot of evidence that came in that hurt them, which there was, but that's because that's where the evidence was. But you know what I'm saying? Each side thinks that. So. All right, so in the early 2000s, a few controversial cases began undermining faith in these tools. Cameron Todd Willingham was executed in 2004 for setting a fire that ended the lives of his three young girls. He says, quote, I am an innocent man from the Gurney. Local investigators, so he didn't get a stay, he was executed. Local investigators had ruled the fire an arson, but national fire experts question their work as based more in folk wisdom than science. One compared it to, quote, witch hunting, which I also have seen the Karen Reed trial quoted as a witch hunt. So a lot of similarities here. Soon after, lawmakers created the Texas Forensic Science Commission, a group of scientists and lawyers who gained a national reputation for helping courts evaluate the validity of various disciplines, and by 2009, the National Academy of Sciences was questioning a number of them too. So a lot of these uh, cases were being questioned by the scientific community and the legal community as well. So that is a good thing that people are starting to pay attention to it. At Roberson's 2003 trial, the shaken baby syndrome diagnosis was presented by pediatrician Janet Squires, who pointed to swelling and hemorrhages, who pointed to swelling and hemorrhages in Nikki's brain. A pathologist named Jill Urban surmised that the girl had sustained multiple head injuries. Neither Squires nor Urban agreed to be interviewed for this story. Roberson's lawyers didn't contest this basic narrative. He had previously admitted to grabbing Nikki while trying to rouse her from unconsciousness, and other witnesses said that they'd seen him threaten, shake, and spank her on other occasions, but there was no direct evidence tying him to her injuries. An emergency room nurse also speculated on the witness stand that Nikki had been SA'd. Testing did not corroborate her testimony, so then that should have never come in. That is total speculation. So if a nurse says, well, I just thought that he did that, you could have not liked the clothes he was wearing that day. And so your biases told you that. And that's where that's coming from. That should have never been testified to. Testing did not corroborate her testimony, and the nurse was not an expert on the subject, but Roberson's lawyers argue these claims further contributed to the jury's decision to sentence him to D. Roe. In a recent letter to the Marshall Project, Roberson described being stunned by the medical testimony. Quote, I was already suffering the pain of losing my daughter, Nikki, like a sudden, violent impact. He wrote, adding that he's praying for release, continuing on saying, so I can start living again and so that I can take back what was stolen from me, end quote. He was nearly executed in 2016, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a stay and told an Anderson County judge to reevaluate the science in this case. New medical experts rejected the earlier diagnoses, linking Nikki's loss of life instead to her chronic infections, as well as a form of apnea that would cause her to collapse and turn blue. That's awful. She'd been prescribed codeine, which can cause breathing difficulties in children. So it was probably a combination of her medical issues and taking that medication. According to the experts, it was common in 2003 to see the toddler's injuries as evidence of shaken baby syndrome, but this diagnosis had spread among doctors without much research to back it up, particularly when applied to children beyond infancy. Newer studies had demonstrated that short falls, oxygen deprivation, and other causes can produce similar outcomes or similar injuries. At the same time, there was a growing body of evidence that police frequently lack training on autism spectrum disorder and misinterpret behavior in ways that cast suspicion on the wrong person. So that was something I wanted to point out earlier, but I'm like, I'll come back to it. So, just because you don't react the way that law enforcement wants you to react in a situation, or you're in shock, you're going through a traumatic event, and i- you might not react the way you might not be on the autism spectrum, but you might be in shock. You might have other um, mental health issues that might make you react in a certain way. There are reasons why people might act one way or another, especially in a traumatic event. So someone like this who's on the spectrum could easily be confused as someone who is lacking sympathy or grief or anything like that. So that is something that needs to be taken in consideration with people. Like you cannot just put people under an umbrella and say this is how you're supposed to act. This is how you're supposed to be in these situations. There is no way to be in that kind of situation. It'd be horrific, and who could even know how to act in that kind of situation? And then you've got the police down your neck, breathing down your neck, asking you questions on top of losing your child to something that you don't know what just took her. It's scary. It's scary that the justice system can just pick people up and make them disappear forever. What's maddening in his case is how they use the autism against him as evidence of his guilt, Sween said. The Anderson County District Attorney's Office did not respond to a request for an interview. Lawyers from the Texas Attorney General's office have asked the U.S. Supreme Court to reject the case. So the AG is saying, go ahead with the execution. They argue that none of the witnesses against Roberson knowingly offered false testimony, and that an ongoing debate among scientists hardly justifies questioning a conviction after it has been reviewed by state courts. Well, no, actually, it should, because science changes every day and we learn new things every day. And if we're just keeping people behind bars just to keep them behind bars, even though we know that they're innocent, what's the point of that? Doesn't make any sense. They note that the medical examiner largely relied on blunt force injuries rather than a theory of shaking when she ruled it as a homicide. If the Supreme Court declines to hear Roberson's case, prosecutors could seek an execution date, and his fate, well, they have and they did, and his fate would ultimately rest with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who could commute the sentence, but seldom does so. Celebrities may start exerting pressure. Author John Grisham is already at Roberson's side. This will hardly be the last case of its kind, where the Innocence Project once used DNA to show how innocent suspects went to prison in cases of unaliving, and SA. Now the organization is taking cases such as those of other Texans, Melissa Lucio, and Rosa Jimenez, in which the loss of life of children were misrepresented as homicides with faulty medical testimony. It's no exaggeration to say hundreds, if not thousands, of parents and caregivers are in prison in cases where no crime has occurred. That's crazy. Says the Vanessa Potkin, the director of special litigation for the organization. She argues the Supreme Court now has an opportunity to send a message that when there is a growing medical or scientific consensus that discredits a criminal conviction, it cannot stand. And I agree with her. Times change, we learn things. That doesn't mean that you just keep someone in prison just because, like I said, what's the point of that? So I'm going to hop over to this page here because this is a petition to stop the October 17th execution of Robert Roberson, an innocent father. You can go sign it. I signed it today. Sign it here on the side where it says signatures. Stop Texas from executing Robert. Put your name, your country, your zip, and your email. That's all they want. All right, so Robert would be the first person in the US executed based on a discredited shaken baby syndrome hypothesis unless the court or Governor Abbott intervenes. Robert Roberson is an innocent father with autism who spent over 20 years on D row in Texas for a crime that never occurred. Mr. Roberson was committed to being a present father to his chronically ill 2-year-old daughter Nikki when he was granted custody in November 2001. That's awful. This man takes in his chronically ill daughter so that he can take care of her. She loses her life in his care, but only because of her health conditions, and probably the codeine didn't help. And then he spends his life in prison for 20 years. Tragically, Nikki passed away from prior medical conditions after a short fall from bed, and Mr. Robertson was wrongly convicted. Mr. Robertson was a special education student when he dropped out of school after the 9th grade. He had undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder. Hospital staff did not know Robertson had autism and judged his response to his daughter's grave condition as lacking emotion. So the hospital staff also noticed that his lack of emotion, or what appeared to be a lack of emotion, was what made him guilty. Mr. Robertson was prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to D row using a now discredited version of shaken baby syndrome. The overwhelming medical and scientific evidence now shows that Nikki lost her life of accidental and natural causes. Mr. Robertson's innocence case is attracting growing and widespread support from eminent scientists, doctors, faith leaders, innocence groups, former federal judges, best-selling novelist John Grisham, and the lead detective who prosecuted him, who put him away, is on his side now too. So who these people all now believe that he contributed, or the detective believes that he contributed to an innocent man being sent to prison. So definitely I'm putting the link below in this video. Definitely go over there and add your name to the petition. Make sure that you do that now. Don't wait because you're going to forget. So go there now. The link's right here. So, or right down here. So, thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate it. Let me know what you guys think of this case, and if you have suggestions for any others that you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much. Please hit that like button on your way out, and I will see you next time. Take care. If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeincourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.